Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Harris County Flood Control District's virtual community engagement meeting to discuss Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvements Project F212-00-00-C001. This virtual community meeting is being offered by the Flood Control District to share vital information with the community. My name is Sheldra Brigham, and I'm with the Flood Control District's communications team. I'm joined tonight with a team of Flood Control District leadership and subject matter experts to ensure we keep you and the community involved on these important flood mitigation projects going on in your community. We're also joined by staff from area elected officials and community associations. We're glad to see the community so engaged in these projects, and we look forward to continuing to share updates and keeping all of you in the community involved. First, we would like to begin tonight's meeting with remarks from Harris County Precinct 2 Commissioner Adrian Garcia.
Thank you and good evening, everybody. I'm Adrian Garcia, Harris County Precinct 2 Commissioner. Thank you to the Flood Control District for hosting this event. And before we begin, I want to send a sincere thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. I know that we are all still working through the impacts of the pandemic, and my hope is that you and your families continue to be safe. If you haven't already, please consider getting vaccinated. If you are hesitant, I completely understand. But I encourage you to speak to your doctor or medical expert to help answer any of your questions or concerns, and hopefully that will lead you to getting your vaccine. My office is hosting ongoing vaccination events throughout our precinct. If you're looking for a place to get vaccinated, be sure to call my office or follow the Harris County Precinct 2 social media pages. My team is updating those on a daily basis. Now let me transition to what brings us here this evening. We're here to talk to you about a flood control project that will help your community. As a part of my new Revive to Thrive initiative, this flood prevention effort will help protect the community and make a major step toward ensuring there are fair and equitable opportunities for communities throughout Precinct 2. Our goal is to focus on revitalization rather than gentrification by empowering communities and creating opportunities for our existing neighborhoods to be more resilient, inclusive, and thriving. With the right investments, resources, infrastructure, commitment, and community involvement, we can all progress and thrive. Harris County works best when all communities are thriving. I'm proud to be from Precinct 2, and I want everyone to know this community is a great place to live, work, and play. This is one of the many flood mitigation projects happening within Precinct 2, aimed at improving our drainage systems to help minimize the impact of major rain events, keeping you, your family, your property, and our communities safe. We know that residents in this community experience flooding during major rain events, including Tropical Storm Allison and, of course, record levels during Hurricane Harvey. This project is intended to help prevent a repeat of those events. Quality infrastructure is not my only responsibility as County Commissioner, but also one of my top priorities. This is why I've tasked my team with taking action and demonstrating real progress to address our community's needs, things that make a difference and make us better prepared to weather the next storm. I hope you will continue to stay engaged in this process. It's important to remember that your voice, your experiences, and your opinions do matter. Again, we're thankful that you've joined us tonight. Please continue to be safe, and if you haven't already gotten your vaccine, please consider doing so. Have a great night.
And thank you, Commissioner Garcia. We appreciate you joining us for tonight's meeting. This virtual public meeting will begin with a presentation to share project updates, including an overview of the Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvement Project, the project timeline, and next steps. The presentation will be followed by a virtual question and answer session with Flood Control District team members. Attendees will be able to submit comments and questions through the website or by phone. And any comments not addressed during the Q&A will receive a response from the Flood Control District after the close of the comment period. Instructions on how you can participate in this virtual meeting are included on this slide. They're on the virtual meeting webpage and also on the Flood Control District's website. And I will also share a reminder of these instructions when we get to the Q&A portion of tonight's meeting. We will now transition to Gary Bessomek, Manager of Feasibility Studies with the Flood Control District. He's going to share information about the Flood Control District and then more about this specific project. Gary, over to you.
Thank you, Sheldra, and a special thanks to each of you for joining us. In this presentation, we will give a brief overview of this project. But before we get to the project specifics, we want to share some information about the Flood Control District. The Harris County Flood Control District is a special purpose district created by the Texas legislature in 1937 in response to devastating floods that hit the Houston area in 1929 and 1935. The Flood Control District is governed by the Harris County Commissioners Court and works closely with other entities in our region, such as the Harris County Engineering Department and the City of Houston. The organization was created in part to serve as a local partner to leverage federal funding for flood damage reduction projects. Our mission has expanded since our founding, leading to billions of dollars in federal, state, and locally funded infrastructure improvements in the ground. The mission of the Harris County Flood Control District is to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. One of the most difficult challenges we face is constructing effective projects that are sensitive to community and natural values in a highly urbanized area. Harris County includes 23 main watersheds, totaling approximately 1,800 square miles and more than 2,500 linear miles of channel. 2,500 miles is approximately the distance from New York to California. A watershed is a geographical region of land that drains to a common channel or outlet. Each watershed has its own unique characteristics and needs. The project we are presenting tonight is in the Galveston Bay Watershed, which is located in southeast Harris County. Our area is flood prone. Here are some of the reasons why. Our area experiences extreme rainfall, including tropical storms and hurricanes. Our area is characterized by flat, slow draining land, and our area soils are clay soils that do not soak up excess rainfall quickly. While the Flood Control District plays a critical role in flood risk reduction, we are one of several entities involved in these efforts in our region. When rain falls on your roof, it flows through several jurisdictions, such as streets and drains, managed by the Harris County Engineering Department, a municipal utility district, or a city, such as the City of Houston, before it flows into a larger channel, creek, or bayou that the Flood Control District owns and maintains. This slide illustrates the various jurisdictions, which sometimes we even share with other entities. Inside neighborhoods, as shown on the left side of this illustration, storm sewers and roadside ditches collect stormwater runoff and start the process of moving it away from streets and homes. Storm sewers and roadside ditches are the responsibility of the underlying municipality and Harris County for unincorporated areas. The larger bayous and channels that take the collected stormwater and move it through our drainage system to Galveston Bay are the responsibility of the Flood Control District. This is shown on the right side of the illustration. In the middle is a stormwater detention basin, sometimes constructed by the Flood Control District. When storm sewers on the left are increased, this creates an increase in runoff. Since it is our policy to avoid any adverse impacts from our projects, detention basins help to safely take in and temporarily store excess stormwater during heavy rain events. Often we partner with Harris County precincts, utility districts, and others to add recreational amenities such as trails to these basins and along our channels. On August 25th, 2018, Harris County voters approved $2.5 billion in bonds for flood risk reduction projects. This vote followed a series of meetings across Harris County in each watershed which resulted in a list of what is now 181 bond projects. As of August 25th, 2021, every project included in the 2018 bond program has been initiated, including all 5 of the projects in the Galveston Bay Watershed. A total of more than $1.35 billion in partnership funding has been secured so far to stretch the 2018 bond program even further. The actual timing of each individual project will depend on a variety of factors, including environmental permitting, right-of-way acquisition, if needed, and potential utility relocation, and in some cases, requirements of a particular grant. That said, project lists and projected schedules are updated regularly on our website. While the bond was for $2.5 billion, the full cost of every project in the bond table is almost $5 billion. So we made it clear from the outset that we would need funding partners to fully construct the projects in the bond program. As I mentioned, we've had some success so far, having secured more than $1.35 billion in partner funds. And this graphic illustrates the many sources of those partnerships, including federal, state, and local funding that Flood Control District is working to secure for Harris County. Each agency has its own definition of eligible projects and its own requirements for local match funding. So the Flood Control District works diligently to match projects to the right partnership opportunities. We will now move into the part of the program that is specifically about the Galveston Bay Watershed and the Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvements Project. I want to first provide a brief overview of the Galveston Bay Watershed. The Galveston Bay Watershed is located on the southeastern edge of Harris County. As you will see on this map, the Galveston Bay Watershed is divided into northern and southern subwatersheds. The small area between the 2 subwatersheds drains westward into Clear Creek. The Galveston Bay Watershed covers about 20 square miles of drainage area. There are about 24 miles of open streams within the Galveston Bay Watershed, including the primary streams, Little Cedar Bayou and Pine Gully, and other tributary channels, all of which drain into Galveston Bay. The watershed primarily drains the area that includes portions of the cities of LaPorte, Morgan's Point, Seabrook, and Pasadena. The watershed has been subject to frequent and significant flooding, most notably Tropical Storm Allison, Tropical Storm Erin, Hurricane Ike, and Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey impacted many homes within the Galveston Bay Watershed, with the Federal Emergency Management Agency reporting 291 filed claims from the 40-plus inch rainfall within the watershed. Despite the significant damage done, Hurricane Harvey was not the storm of record in this watershed. Hurricane Ike hit the area with a very significant tidal surge, flooding over 1,100 homes. A reason for the drastic difference in claim counts is coastal storm surge, which is defined as stormwater pushed inland as a result of a rising sea level caused by atmospheric pressure changes and wind associated with the storm. Completed in 2021, the Galveston Bay Watershed Planning Study investigated flooding problems, identified ongoing and proposed flood mitigation projects, and evaluated and recommended potential projects to reduce flooding risks. Planners working with Harris County, municipalities such as the City of LaPorte and other agencies, both to clarify flooding issues in the watershed and to improve coordination between Flood Control District regional projects and future local projects. It is important to acknowledge that the watershed's vulnerability to flooding is due to storm surges from its proximity to the coast and flat topography. The watershed study we are discussing today solely assessed the performance of the watershed's internal drainage system and proposed mitigation strategies related to local riverine flooding. Coastal storm surge flooding is currently being evaluated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and others. We also want to give credit to our partners in funding the Galveston Bay Watershed Planning Study. The Flood Control District applied for and was awarded partnership funding for this project from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program, which is shortened to CDBG-DR. This was awarded through the Texas General Land Office of the State of Texas to Harris County Community Services Department. The Galveston Bay Watershed Study identified and evaluated 10 locations with significant drainage or flooding problems. Several current active and proposed projects underway in the Galveston Bay Watershed allowed for the study to focus its efforts on 2 of the 10 locations for which improvements had not already been proposed and initiated. These now active and ongoing proposed projects include both Flood Control District and Harris County Recovery and Resiliency Division projects funded by the 2018 bond program, as well as by local municipalities. The study resulted in 2 additional recommended projects, one for each of the 2 areas studied, including the Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvements project we are discussing today. The Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvements project will reduce flooding risks for this residential, commercial, and industrial area in the heart of the city of LaPorte by improving the ability of this drainage system to carry stormwater without overflowing. The project is located in the northern subwatershed of Galveston Bay. The northern subwatershed is characterized as mostly developed industrial facilities with mixed residential and commercial properties. Except for some very small areas, the northern subwatershed is located primarily within the city of LaPorte and is directly drained by 3 small tributaries to the Galveston Bay estuary. Stormwater detention basins were evaluated, but did not prove to be cost-effective. However, the area is quite flat, and there are large designated floodplains on Little Cedar Bayou, which is tributary F216-00-00, and which has a large coastal storm surge zone abutting the bay. The Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvements project is currently in the design phase. Most flood control district projects follow a typical life cycle, but all projects are unique. In the case of the Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvements project, the Galveston Bay Watershed Planning Study served to address most of the feasibility study issues. The study also included some aspects of the traditional preliminary engineering stage and provided enough project details to move directly into the design stage, which is where we are today. On this slide, you will see the location of this project and nearby streets. The F212-00-00 channel begins near West Barbers Cut Boulevard and flows south and east into Galveston Bay. The Deer Creek project begins at Broadway Street and ends downstream of East B Street. The channel includes improvements to open channels located within flood control district easements and to underground culverts located primarily within LaPorte Street right-of-way areas. The channel improvements include 3 key segments: improvements to the existing open channel from Broadway Street to Utah Street, conversion of the open channel to reinforced concrete box storm sewer along Utah Street to Main Street, and replacement of an existing pipe with a reinforced concrete box from Main Street to a new outfall into an existing open grass-lined channel downstream of East B Street. Stormwater detention is not required because the open channel section of F212-00-00 has capacity for 100-year flows downstream to the bay. I'd like to take a moment to describe a feature of this project, which is the use of a box culvert. A stormwater culvert is a tunnel-like structure, either a pipe or rectangular box, that is constructed to provide stormwater conveyance beneath a road, railroad, or other surface facility to allow its continued normal operation. Box culverts are made of reinforced concrete segments, come in a variety of sizes, and are usually rectangular in shape. Box culverts are more expensive than open channels, but are often used when right-of-way space is limited and cannot accommodate an open channel, or when a surface obstruction such as a roadway must be crossed. Like any similar channel or storm sewer, this infrastructure must be periodically inspected and cleaned of any silt and debris. The Deer Creek conveyance channel and box culvert will be sized so that the system can convey a 100-year or 1% frequency rain event, as determined using Atlas 14, the latest official guidance for storms in the area. In addition, the Deer Creek project will have benefits for the adjacent subwatershed of the F212-00-00 tributary located to the east. During major storms, stormwater from the upper reaches of the Deer Creek watershed currently overflow into the adjacent F210 watershed. The Deer Creek project improvements will remove overflows predicted to occur during all storms up to the 100-year frequency, and therefore will reduce flooding risk for homes and businesses in the adjacent watershed. Let's now take a look at the outlook for this project and our next steps. As for next steps, the Flood Control District will complete engineering conceptual design report, which is intended to resolve constructability issues and determine needed land acquisition or utility relocation. We will also complete the preparation of final construction bid-ready documents. I will now turn the program back over to Sheldra to kick off the question and answer session.
Thank you, Gary. Before we get to the Q&A portion, I do want to share a quick reminder that we'd love to hear from you on this project and others that are moving forward across Harris County. To learn more about this project, to ask questions, and to sign up for our mailing list, please visit hcfcd.org/F212. Now, as a reminder, there are 3 ways that you can submit a comment about this project during tonight's session. Submit a comment on the site in the box near the presentation live stream. You can submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website, and that is hcfcd.org/F212, or you can submit a comment via phone, and that number is 855-925-2801, and you'll want to utilize the meeting code 5861. Now, if you are joining us via phone tonight, please press star to leave a message. Additionally, I want to reiterate that any questions not addressed during tonight's Q&A will receive a response from the Flood Control District that will be following the close of the comment period. Now, information from this meeting, as well as a recording of the live stream, will be available on the Flood Control District's website and also on our YouTube channel. Joining Gary for our Q&A session tonight are Jonathan St. Romain, Department Manager, Capital Projects South, and Stephanie Zertuche, Project Manager for the Deer Creek Project. And now it is time to take some of your questions. Our first question will be for Stephanie. When do you anticipate construction to start, and how long will it last?
So this project is anticipated to begin in early 2023, and once it does actually start, it will take approximately 1 year to complete.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next question is for Jonathan. Improvements to the existing open channel from Broadway Street to Utah Street, what does that entail?
Yeah, so right now there is the existing open channel there, and the improvements that we talk about typically will just mean the widening and deepening of that channel so that it has more carrying capacity. It can carry more flow, more stormwater runoff. As far as the design of that goes, there's a couple things that we look at. One is the space that we have. Sometimes we're a little constrained, and as this is sort of in an urban area, we do have to look at the amount of right-of-way or the amount of property space that we have. The other thing that we look at is the side slopes. What kind of side slope will we need to design that to? And we have some geotechnical constraints, and that's why it takes some time as part of this design stage to do those kinds of studies and get recommendations from a geotechnical consultant that'll tell us how steep our side slopes can be, and that, of course, in turn lets us know how wide that our channel can be.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next question will be for Stephanie. Why are you using a box culvert in this project instead of an open channel?
So as Jonathan was mentioning in the last answer, there's some right-of-way limitations that we are looking at in this area. And so box culverts are often used when that right-of-way space is limited. Doesn't look like we can accommodate an open channel or deepening, widening improvements along Utah Street.
Thank you, Stephanie. The next question will be for Gary. How was this project identified and why was it recommended?
Yes, I talked a little bit about it in the presentation, but prior to it becoming a project, we first started with a feasibility study of the Galveston Bay Watershed. And so this was one of two projects. This was actually the highest scoring project that came out of that study. But the feasibility study that we conducted was a planning study that investigated flooding problems and identified ongoing and proposed flood mitigation projects. And we looked at the entirety of the Galveston Bay Watershed. So the general process that we followed to identify this project was we start with the process of looking at historical flood data. We look at computer simulations, we look at floodplain maps, all of the available data that we have. And so we put all that together in our study and we identify flood problem areas, areas within the watershed that have experienced historical flooding. Once we know where those areas are, we then go into a process to identify alternatives, projects that we could implement based on whatever the unique problems are that have caused flooding in the particular areas that were identified. So as we go through that process, we end up with multiple areas that projects could be done, and we end up with alternatives that could be applied to any of those areas. We then go through a process, once we've identified alternatives and potential projects, we go through and we rank and score those projects using guidance that was approved by Harris County Commissioners Court on how to prioritize and rank. And so in that process, we're looking at things like what are the benefits of each of the projects that we could do, how much do these alternatives cost, and then we look at some other information so that we can put a score to these projects. So once we go through that, we now have a series of alternatives with potential project rankings. And then we go through the community engagement or stakeholder involvement, and ultimately we end up with recommended projects. So the project we're talking about today, the Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvement Project, it was identified as a high scoring project in the feasibility study that was done for Galveston Bay Watershed. It scored the highest, so it became the recommended project. It's actually one of two projects that have been moved forward. And that's kind of in a nutshell, the summary of how we got here.
Thank you, Gary. Next question will be for Jonathan. Can you tell us about other projects in LaPorte?
Sure. So the city of LaPorte has several things going on, and the flood control district is also partnering with the city of LaPorte on a couple of things. So first, flood control district only projects include up a little bit north of here, and that's the Brooklyn Stormwater Detention Basin. And also there is our Red Bluff Stormwater Detention Basin, which is technically in the city of Pasadena, but it's close by, and it does positively affect a few city of LaPorte neighborhoods. In addition to that, I mentioned those partnership projects that are actually being led by the city of LaPorte, but the Harris County Flood Control District is contributing funding to. And those projects are the Bayside Terrace subdivision, as well as another Brooklyn subdivision drainage improvements project. And then in addition to those, back down here in the Galveston Bay Watershed, we have what we call the F212 project, and that's down on Little Cedar Bayou. I think Gary mentioned that a little earlier, and that's a partnership project with the city of LaPorte that is right now in the feasibility study stage. So there's several things going on, and this project that we're here to talk about tonight is just one of them, but there's definitely a few more things going on with our partners in LaPorte.
Thank you, Jonathan. Another question can go for Gary or Jonathan. You can weigh in if you'd like. Are there other projects planned for Deer Creek improvements?
I'm going to pass over to Jonathan, but from our study, this is the project that was recommended. It's the only project that I personally am aware of for this particular channel.
Yep, Gary, that's right. This is the only project that we have going on for this particular channel. But I think as we laid out here, it's a pretty good project that takes this entire channel corridor, the 100-year water surface, what we call the 100-year water surface elevation, all within banks or within the box culverts, and removes a good number of structures from the floodplain. And so, yep, it's the only one in Deer Creek, but it is going to be a good project.
And Jonathan, was the city of LaPorte involved in this project?
The city of LaPorte is not involved in this one directly. So this project is in the Flood Control's 2018 bond program. And in that bond program, it's listed as ID F-98. The funding was solely on the list for the Flood Control District. And so it's not listed as a partnership project. However, the city of LaPorte is involved through coordination. We've had several coordination meetings with the folks over there because we're going down city streets and have to talk through the utility tie-ins and utility conflicts and other things. So the city of LaPorte is not directly or financially involved, but they're definitely indirectly involved and aware of the project.
Thank you, Jonathan. Stephanie, next question is for you. What will be the impacts to the community from this project on traffic, for example?
Well, I think it's still too early to tell. We're still in the beginning phases of our design, so we don't really have those details yet. But once we get those, we will be sharing them.
Thank you. Jonathan, what is the goal of this project?
So we are contributing to the overall flood damage reduction effort in this watershed, and the goal is to provide some additional channel and box storm sewer conveyance that's going to reduce flooding risks for the residential, commercial, and industrial area in town. And you see on the screen there the extents of the project, and so by doing these improvements, we aim to lower our peak water surface elevations in the area. And you see here, the new channel configuration will convey the 1% annual chance or 100-year rain event, and that's going to reduce the floodplain.
Thank you, Jonathan. What stage is the project in right now?
We are in the design stage right now, and Gary mentioned this a little bit in the presentation. As we looked at our typical project life cycle, we are actually able to skip the preliminary engineering stage of this project, and that's for a couple of reasons. Namely, the feasibility study stage gave us a few more answers than we're sometimes used to from the feasibility study. Most of the time when we get these feasibility studies, we have to go into this preliminary engineering stage. And in this preliminary engineering stage, that's when we look at additional alternatives to really optimize and find out what is the best project going to be. And we look at different, for example, sizes and shapes of different detention basins and how water gets in and out of the detention basins. And we make sure that those types of things are optimized and become the most efficient. In this case, like I said, the feasibility study really answered a lot of those questions for us. And so we were able to jump directly into the design stage. Now, at the beginning of this design stage, we do have some additional due diligence to carry out, and that includes some of the things that would normally be in that preliminary engineering stage, such as some environmental investigations. We still have to follow federal law in terms of wetlands and cultural analyses and threatened and endangered species investigations, things like that. So those still take place. We still have to do all the necessary geotechnical investigations. And I mentioned that earlier when talking about the open channel and the side slopes there. So we've got to find out what the soil is underneath the project. And one of the biggest things that we're doing in this design stage is looking at potential utility conflicts. We're in the middle of a city, and so there's streets and cross streets and storm sewer inlets and any other utility that you can think of crisscrossing the area. And so we've got to do all of those investigations to make sure there are no conflicts. And if there are conflicts, we've got to figure out the best way to handle that situation in design. So I hope that answers the question.
It did. Thank you, Jonathan. I want to remind everyone, if you are just joining us tonight, how you can participate in tonight's meeting. You can submit a comment on the site in the box near the presentation live stream. So that's the first way. You can submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/F212, or you can submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801. And if you are joining us by phone, you'll want to utilize the meeting code 5861 and press star to leave a message. Additionally, if we do not get to your questions tonight, or we need to do a little more digging to get the answers, we'll respond back to you following the close of the comment period. Now we'll get back to some of your questions that are coming in. This one is for Gary, and you mentioned that this is one of two projects identified in the watershed plan. What was the second project, and what is the status of that project?
Yes, I think we should have a slide. Do we have a slide that shows that project? I can describe where it's at, but well, I'll give a description if we don't have it handy. The other recommended project is in the El Jardín neighborhood, and it's along a ditch that we refer to as F212-00-00. And the project is a stormwater conveyance project. And what was recommended from the watershed plan was to basically replace, I believe, two culverts, one at the El Jardín Drive and Yupon Drive, just basically upsizing the box culverts, the crossing that goes underneath the road. And so El Jardín Drive and Yupon Drive would both see a larger opening culvert underneath, and that would create additional capacity. This project's in the early stages of initiation, so it's not quite as far as the project that we're talking about in today's public meeting. And it's being funded. This F220 project would be funded from the same bond ID as the Deer Creek project that we're talking about today. It's just, it's going to be initiating after the fact. And we anticipated on the feasibility side that there would be enough funding to potentially move into that project. But we're focusing on this 212 first as the higher scoring project. And then the other project will kind of move in a little bit at a lag, a little bit behind this other project.
All right, thank you, Gary. Next question is for, let's see, Stephanie. Can you clarify the actual project boundaries, in particular Deer Creek?
Sure. So the F212 channel, it begins near West Barbers Cut Boulevard, and it flows south and east into Galveston Bay. The Deer Creek project limits begin at Broadway Street and end downstream at East B Street, where it all will outfall into the Ohio Street. There's a channel near the Ohio Street Park. That's where F212 outfalls, and that's where the limits will end.
Gotcha. Thank you, Stephanie. Let's see, Jonathan, will this project take care of all flooding in this area? If not, why not?
So it's definitely impossible to say that any one project will completely end flooding in an area, but this Deer Creek conveyance channel box culvert will be sized so that the system can convey a 1% frequency or 100-year rain event. That's determined by the Atlas 14 rainfalls, by the way. So this project will definitely reduce the risk of flooding in the area, but we certainly can't say that that it will completely end flooding. And then that's a good segue to say and remind people that the Flood Control District recommends that everyone in Harris County and surrounding areas have flood insurance to guard against the possibility of personal and financial loss. And you can actually visit www.hcfcd.org/MAAPNEXT for MAP Next. There's 2 A's in MAP. So hcfcd.org/MAAPNEXT to learn about the Flood Control District's MAP Next initiative. And that aims to produce, what we would call the new flood maps, Harris County's really most comprehensive and complete set of flood hazard maps and information.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. We are a little past the halfway point for tonight's meeting. So now might be a good time to maybe hit a couple of the project highlights, a quick overview for folks who may be just joining us. I'm not sure Gary or Jonathan wants to do that. You guys decide, and I'm going to go to Stephanie for a question real quick while we get those slides together. Let's see here. Question right here. All righty. All right, this is from Susan Martin, and she's asking, so exactly where is the water going to empty into? And that's a question for Stephanie.
Yeah, so it will along B Street, at the end of B Street, there is an open channel where F212 picks up. It's an open channel, and it's near the Ohio Street Park. And that's where the project limits are.
All righty. Here. Thank you for that, Stephanie. Okay, so if we could go back and just kind of go through a few of the project slides for folks who are just joining us and may have missed that opening part of the presentation. We are getting those together to get started. And again, for folks who did join us late, may have missed portions of this, or just want to have the opportunity to go back and view this presentation, as well as the meeting materials, that's all going to be available on the Flood Control District's website, and it'll also be on our YouTube channel as well. Get the opportunity to go back and revisit it. Okay, and I think we're going to have Gary go back through some of the project highlights.
Okay, I can give some highlights, and if there's some specifics about the design itself, I'll defer that to Jonathan. But the projects that the project that we're talking about today is the Deer Creek Stormwater Conveyance Improvement Project. And for the graphic that's up right now, it's in the northern portion of the Galveston Bay Watershed. And you can see it highlighted on the graphic. The project is actually the highest scoring project that we generated from our feasibility study of the Galveston Bay Watershed. And in that study, we basically studied the entirety of those highlighted areas on this graphic to determine where there's been historical flooding. In the case of Galveston Bay, there were already some projects that were on the books that were moving. So if there was already a project associated to a channel, we didn't focus on those channels with our feasibility study because those other projects were already moving, already had funding. So the area that scored the highest is this project that's highlighted right here, the F212 or the Deer Creek Stormwater, the Deer Creek channel. What the project basically is a increase of the existing channel out there. It's an increase of the open channel, and in segments of it, it's goes underground, so there's an enclosed system. But what we ended up finding was that this area here is restricted, and because the topography is so flat, when you get larger rain events, the water cannot get through this section that's highlighted in purple, and water will just spread out and sheet flow to the area, create street flooding. There will be home flooding, and the water actually will overflow and go over to the west and go into the 216 channel. So as we were identifying this as a potential project, we were looking at, okay, this area has lower capacity. And so we started looking at alternatives to say, what would it take to get the water out? Typically, because we have a no impact requirement, we typically would see a detention basin at the downstream end where we're doing improvements. But as we did the study, we found that the lower end of F212 actually has enough capacity that if we can get the water to it, that water can safely drain all the way to the bay without adversely impacting any of the residents, streets, any of the infrastructure down there. So this basically turned into our project from the feasibility side. We identified improvements for what you can see in the highlighted area for 212. And we talked about the process was I work on the feasibility side. So sort of our job is at a high level to figure out where the next project would be and what that project would look like. And then once we get to a far enough point that we've identified that, then we hand it off to Jonathan's side where it goes into the design. And in the case of the F212, the Deer Creek project that we're talking about, enough information was provided early on in the feasibility that this project has sort of skipped a step in our typical project life cycle and has jumped over the PER process because we were able to do enough work. There wasn't a significant amount of right-of-way that was required. So the project was able to move straight into design. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about, is that the project's in design, and Jonathan is kind of, in his team, is taking it over from this point, and they're moving the project to ultimately to get it to construction. So that's kind of a high level overview of what we talked about today.
Good deal. Thank you, Gary. We'll take another question from Robin Cunningham. She's asking, have there been any studies of the erosion impacts to the coastline properties?
Well, I'll take a quick stab. The feasibility studies that we conducted were strictly looking at the internal infrastructure for the open channel network or enclosed channels within the Galveston Bay Watershed. So the feasibility study that we worked on did not look at coastal erosion, anywhere in that study. We did address or look at erosion if it was occurring within the channel system that we looked at, but nothing that we did as flood control was looking at erosion impacts along coastline properties.
Thank you, Gary. Jonathan, will there be future meetings for the other projects in this watershed you mentioned earlier?
Yes, there will be, and I mentioned several of those other projects, and I will probably mess them up if I try to tell you the exact meeting date, and I'll probably mix them up. So I will just tell you to refer to our website, and our communications folks do a really good job of keeping those websites up to date, and so you can find that at hcfcd.org in the Galveston Bay Watershed page, as well as the Armand Bayou watershed page, as there's down here in the southeast part of the county and the city of LaPorte. There's a few different watersheds that are in your area. So yep, please stay tuned to the website.
Absolutely. You can go to those project pages, put your email information, and anytime there's something going on in that watershed or that particular project, we will update you on it. Our next question is for Jonathan. Joe Greason is asking, do you have any planned project to remove the vegetation and sediment in A104-1100 and A104-1000 in Short Acre? These need to be cleaned out to prevent local flooding.
Yep. So I don't know the answer to that right now, and those would be maintenance projects in a different watershed. But we can go back and look and check with our maintenance folks to see if we have anything planned. And then the other thing that you could do to let us know about those issues is go to our website, hcsd.org, and at the very top, there's a button that says service request, and you can click on that button and submit that in directly to us. You have already got down, or you know the flood control channel ID. So yeah, just let us know exactly where that is with that service request button on the website.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let's see. Another question coming in. Will this project help LaPorte, but move the floodwaters to another area? And that one is for Jonathan as well.
No, so we looked at it in the feasibility study and determined that we can do these channel improvements and at the same time, downstream of this area, all of that water remains in bank in the channel, and so we don't have an adverse impact. And it is our policy, I should mention, it's our policy at Flood Control to not do a project that has any adverse impact to anywhere downstream. And so we definitely do make sure of that before we do anything.
Question coming in for Gary. You mentioned Atlas 14. What is that?
Yes, when we do any of our studies, whenever we work with FEMA to do floodplain maps, we have to use rainfall data and predicted rainfall data. So Atlas 14 is the latest rainfall data that was approved for use in the state of Texas. It actually covers many of the states in this area. But what it is it's a study. It's the Atlas 14 is based on a study of looking at historical rainfall over a long period of time and determining, based on statistics, what 100-year rainfall in our area would be. So prior to Atlas 14, I want to say 100-year rainfall in this area was around 12.5 inches, something of that magnitude. And now I believe it's in the 15 to 16 range. So what it does is, periodically when we do our studies, we have to know what is a 100-year rain event. And there really is no way of knowing what it is without looking at the historical data. So when we refer to Atlas 14, that just means we're using the latest rainfall data that incorporates a lot of the more recent flood events that the area has experienced. And it looks at all that to statistically kind of give us guidance on, when we say it's a 100-year event, that tells us it can handle so many inches per hour over a 24-hour period.
Thank you, Gary. Let's see. Jonathan, one of our slides, it mentioned that the bond program was approved by voters in 2018 and updated in 2021. What changed to the projects?
Yeah, it was the bond program was just reconstructed in March of 2021 to include all 181 flood risk reduction projects across Harris County. And so there were a couple of projects where we found during the first couple of years of this program that it made sense to maybe combine them together into one, things like that. And so that's what we mean by it was updated.
And how does this project fit into the overall 2018 bond program?
So this project is in our bond program listed under bond map ID F-98, and it's just simply called right-of-way acquisition, design, and construction of general drainage improvements in the Galveston Bay Watershed. And Gary mentioned that feasibility study that told us this, or that generated this F212 project. And so that's where it fits in. As far as financials go, this bond ID is funded at $4 million.
Good deal. Thank you, Jonathan. Gary, will any of the other watershed study projects be implemented?
Yes, the watershed study, there were 2 recommended projects that came out of that. And the reason there were 2 is we were trying to, when we went into the feasibility study, we were given from the bond the $4 million that Jonathan mentioned. So we are basically our target for trying to find projects in the watershed were, let's study everywhere that we've seen flooding problems. Let's identify what could be done. But we were trying to come up with projects that we could use this money towards. So the two projects that were recommended both scored very high. And they were both kind of, when combined, were in that $4 million range. So as the project goes from from feasibility to construction, every time we relook at it, we do adjustments to the overall project costs. We pull new information, we learn more about pipelines and other utilities. And so the project estimates that we do in the feasibility side get refined. And so it was our recommendation that the two projects that we talked about, the one, the Deer Creek, as well as the F220, that both of those move forward. In order to make sure that we had enough funding, though, and because the Deer Creek project had more information in it than the other project, we've moved this project to go straight into design. And so it's pushing forward. So as we get further into it and we have better cost estimates, that'll tell us how quickly we'll be able to go and move to the other project. For all projects, though, that we recommend from feasibility, and this is countywide, most of our feasibility studies will identify more projects than the bond had available. So those projects are being put on our back list to be looked for. They're all candidates for partnership projects. We talked about it in the presentation, for state, federal, grants, finding partners. And so anything that didn't make it on or that needs additional funding, that becomes just part of our work effort, is to try to figure out how to fund those. So the question of, will this get constructed? I believe that the projects will. It's just a question of how quickly we can get to it. And that's all a question of, availability of funding.
Thank you, Gary. Stephanie, who's responsible for cleaning the streets during construction? How does that work?
So the construction contractor will have that in his contract. He will be responsible for keeping dirt from impacting any nearby roads, as well as preventing impacts to the stormwater quality. If there are issues, sometimes, we do see that, they can also be reported to our Flood Control District Service Request Center on the HCFCD website.
And Stephanie, when was construction supposed to start?
So we are anticipating and working towards getting started early 2023. And then as long as it gets started on time, we are thinking about 1 year for project duration.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. All right. Gary, I think you touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but why are we using a box culvert in this project if it's more expensive?
I'm sorry, were you directing that to me?
Yes, Gary.
Okay. Box culverts are typically more expensive than a open channel, but that's not always the case. Like, if you just compare the box culvert to the open channel, typically it's going to be more expensive. But the box culvert typically can convey more water in a smaller cross-sectional area than an open channel, because our open channels, to follow our criteria, there's a certain side slope. And as you have a deeper channel, the top width of that channel gets bigger and bigger. So oftentimes when we have in more developed areas, or when we're working under roads or near that, it's just a lot easier to put in an enclosed system. And we can likely do that in a much smaller area. So generally, it is more expensive if you look at it. But in the case of this, if we had to move utilities or move a road or do those type of things to try to put in an open channel, then that starts to become much more expensive. So the recommendation that we looked at was, for segments of this proposed project are going to be enclosed, because in the bigger picture, by doing that, we were actually saving money than trying to do something that would be open.
Good deal. Thank you, Gary. And with that, like to share one final reminder that we are continuing to accept comments and feedback on this project through March 31st. Thanks to Gary, Jonathan, and Stephanie for giving us such great answers tonight. We do also want to encourage everyone to get flood insurance as flood season in Harris County runs year round. Thank you all again so much for joining us this evening and for all of the input that you're giving us on this project. We look forward to continuing to share updates on our work as it moves forward. Stay safe and have a great evening.